Diamond or Reed? I just wanted to say, start the recording. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. Before we get started with our program with Dr. Tami Harel Ben-Shahar, I'm going to ask our Zoom Gabbai, Orit Golan, to give us a little housekeeping information about Zoom.
So happy to do that. So just welcome and Boker Tov and Erev Tov. Everybody, welcome to our last Israel Connection Committee program this year, I think. So we are recording. If you don't want your face to be on this recording, you can just stop the video. We'll be just posting it on the YouTube channel for that Shalom. Also, if you have a question, I learned this from another webinar series that I've gone to, that you can, this is really helpful, especially for Zoom Gabbais and moderators, if you can start your text in the chat with this capital word called question, and then the question stands out for those of us who are looking for questions. And I love that little tip. So that's my tip of the day. Please keep your Zoom muted, please. And if you want to just see whoever's speaking, you know what to do on the top right. Under view, you just click on speaker. So we hope you enjoy this, and I will be sliding out just before the end, unfortunately, and Diamond, my ICC colleague, will take my place. So thank you, and back to you, Karen.
Okay. So again, if you have questions, please feel free to write them in chat, but we'll also, depending on how time works out, we'll also leave some time at the end for additional Q&A. Let me first give you the introduction of Dr. Harel Ben-Shahar. And before I start asking her questions, but after you know who she is, I'd like to tell you how Barry and I came to meet her. Dr. Tami Harel Ben-Shahar is a lecturer at the Faculty of Law and the academic director of the Clinics for Law and Social Change. Dr. Harel Ben-Shahar completed her LLD at the Hebrew University Law Faculty. Her dissertation on equality in education and the privatization of education won the Bronfman Prize for Outstanding Dissertation in the Humanities, Social Sciences, and Law. After completing her doctoral studies, Harel Ben-Shahar spent 2 years as a postdoctoral scholar at Columbia University and at the Tikva Center in the NYU Law School as a Fulbright Fellow. Her scholarship engages issues in the intersection between law and philosophy, and it focuses especially on education law and philosophy, distributive justice, human rights, and political philosophy. I could probably spend another 10 minutes interviewing Dr. Harel, who has graciously given me the opportunity to refer to her as Tami during our interview here, although we've only met face-to-face once. And that situation surrounded the fact that my husband Barry had a client who left a significant bequest to the music department of a number of universities, including Haifa University. And as a result of that, we were very lucky to be invited to the universities that for which this bequest was left for special VIP tours. I must say, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, that Barry and I were blown away by our tour at Haifa University. We learned about the city of Haifa, its uniqueness. We met some of the students, a mixed student body, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Druze, and kind of as a little, I don't know, an extra dessert, the organizers of the tour invited Dr. Harel Ben Shahar to talk to us because they knew that Barry was a lawyer and they thought that he might be interested in hearing about the law clinic. However, as she spoke, I'm not sure how much into her explanation she was. I turned to her and I said, "Excuse me if it's out of line, but would you mind speaking to our synagogue?" I found her quite engaging, knowledgeable, and realized that her philosophy in law, vis-a-vis Israel, education, I think would provide a lot of insight to the members of our congregation. So with that, I am going to first ask Tommy. Tommy, can you tell us a little bit about the city of Haifa and Haifa University? How do the two, interact, and let's add into that, what makes Haifa University unique among universities in Israel?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Karen, for your super generous opening and for this invitation to talk to you. I know Haifa from I studied law at Haifa University. I'm from Jerusalem. I'm Yerushalmit. And as some of you might know, people who are Yerushalmim don't usually leave Jerusalem. They have a tendency not to, anything further than Sha'ar Hagai, which is, the twisting and turning out of Jerusalem, seems like, traveling abroad is easier. But I was kind of dragged to the north by who was my new husband in those days, who studied in the Technion, which is where people who want to be, go into high tech and into engineering. And he was also from the north, so he went to learn in Haifa, and I sort of said, okay, so let's see what this University of Haifa is all about. And I fell in love with the University of Haifa first, and then with Haifa, because of some really special things about Haifa. And I've since studied in many universities, including Hebrew University, Tel Aviv University, NYU, Columbia, and Haifa has a very special vibe about it, and a very special mission, I think, for Israel that I find, that I can relate to, and I can see it a mission and meaning to Haifa. So University of Haifa, and I think that tells also about the city, is the most diverse. It's also the youngest law faculty, and it's a young university, relatively young university. We are just celebrating our 50th. So relative to Hebrew University in Tel Aviv, which are older, it's a relatively new university. It isn't very large. We have something like 18,000 students in our student body, and we boast the most diverse student body in Israel. And I say we boast, although I think that, sometimes it's said more as a slogan than as something that is, it's sometimes also a price to pay, this diversity. It's difficult to be a diverse campus. It's hard to teach a diverse student body, and there are oftentimes tension between students in Israel. In the past few years, we've had the riots in Haifa, and now there's a kind of another wave of tension rising, but we really value the diverse student body, and we try to see the community as something, as a kind of model for how Israel might grow the kind of society that Israeli society might grow into. And I will say a bit more about this perhaps later when I talk about the clinics, because when I was planning with this with Karen, and I said, you know, we can talk about the successes, but I actually like to talk a lot about the challenges and about, you know, the places in which we fail, both in the legal clinics and as a university and as a society. I don't think there's anything to be ashamed of, you know, the places in which we fail. We all fail. And I think that that is the interesting, you know, that is really where we can learn something about our society, about our university, the places in which we don't succeed so much. So I'll say a bit more about this diversity, because I think that, you know, we're not really there yet. We boast it, but we're not really able to celebrate this diversity, at least not fully, or not how we perhaps would like to see, you know, we like to think ourselves as succeeding. So the campus is perched on the top of Mount Carmel, which is a beautiful, beautiful scenery. We're really in the middle of a national park, which, you know, could raise some questions. You know, why is the campus built quite detached from the city, especially from downtown, which is where, you know, legal clinics, most of our clients are people who are disadvantaged. We like to be more immersed in the society, in the community. The campus is not. The campus is a beautiful hill overlooking the sea from almost all directions, because it's the build of the mountain is like that, and it's very beautiful. Very close to the Druze towns of Sophia and Dalit el Carmel, which are adjacent to Haifa, but not really inside of Haifa. And Haifa is a mixed city, right? So we have Jews and Arabs. It's a relatively successful example of a mixed city, although, as I said, in the past 2 years, there have been riots in which this kind of coexistence has been cracked, I think to a large extent, where both Jews and Arabs have felt insecure and have felt threatened by the other side, and there's been violence. A small episode, but I think that has left everyone feeling kind of, you know, that everything is very fragile here in Haifa. Still a very vibrant city, kind of more laid back than Tel Aviv. The Haifa people don't like to, you know, dress up too much. When we go to Tel Aviv, we feel completely overwhelmed with the fashion. So it's quite laid back, but very nice. And it's a seaside town. I don't live in Haifa, actually. I live in Zichron Yaakov, which is slightly to the south. But that is Haifa. Quite a large community, and I'll get to that. Quite a large community also of undocumented individuals and asylum seekers here in Haifa. Quite a few neighborhoods with a large percentage of people in poverty. So we do have, you know, the different kinds of challenges that human rights lawyers are interested in. That's Haifa.
Okay, I just want you to know that I have challenges with the dress code in Tel Aviv as well.
Yes, you know, you always you know, wake up in the morning feeling you're really dressed very well, and then you just reach Tel Aviv and you say, what was I thinking? I'm just underdressed.
Really? Well, I guess I should say once a kibbutznik, always a kibbutznik.
Yeah.
Okay, among the things we discussed was the social justice approach of your law clinic. Now, I personally don't know a lot about law clinics, though I'm familiar with them, you know, in general. Can you explain a little bit about the clinic? Who do you serve? What do you do? And as part of that, I know that you have about a 7-minute video that you can also show us.
Right. So basically, the law clinics are an advanced course in law. Students from second year on can take what we call experiential courses. Some of them are real life cases, which is the clinics. I'll say a bit more about that. And some are courses in which we teach our students how to negotiate, or all kinds of more practical skills that they learn. The clinics are within this category of experiential education, experiential legal education. The legal clinics are basically courses in which students practice law. They take part in real life cases, and since we have lawyers who basically are, they are the lead lawyers in the case, and the students just kind of tag along and learn and do all the legal work that they're allowed to do. In Israel, students aren't allowed to represent clients in courts, but they are allowed to help and to write briefs and do a lot of the work before we actually reach a representation in courts. Our clinical center and most clinical centers in law schools have, it varies between the years, but we usually have between 6 and 8 legal clinics to choose from. And all the legal clinics take cases that are related to human rights or to creating access to law to people who can't afford a lawyer, right? So we have 3 related goals. The first is to promote human rights, to promote access to justice and access to the courts to people who would otherwise be unable to access the courts because they wouldn't be able to fund a lawyer. The second is to train our students, right, to prepare them for their work, but even more than just preparation, how to write a brief and how to represent clients, how to interview clients. We also, it's more a matter of education in terms of what kind of lawyer we would like them to be, right? So we think that once our students meet these clients, these people who are usually underprivileged or, groups who are discriminated against, then something about, and we reflect about this experience and about how law and how legal institutions treat people differently, about the power gaps that we see in real life law, because sometimes students, they come to law school and they have a very idealistic picture about how the law works, right? So maybe they've seen a few films about lawyers or, like TV series and things like that. But when they really come across clients and they go to court, it's such a gap between what they expect and what they see, and that is what we talk about in the law clinics. So further on, when they go ahead and they become lawyers themselves, most of them won't go and be human rights lawyers, right? Most of them will be they'll go into law firms, and that's fine. But we think, and our experience shows us that people who have gone through the law clinics and have represented the poor person against the bank, or against a tenant that has been evacuated from their house, then even if they end up representing like the other side, the kind of lawyer they will be, the kind of responsibility that they will feel towards, towards human rights, towards access to justice, will be completely different. So we have an educational mission. And the third is a research mission. We are a research university, and the experiences that the law clinics, the experience and the knowledge that we gain about the law and about the various fields of law that we practice create a very unique kind of knowledge that we then translate into legal research. And so the areas of law that we practice, and we have something like 100 students every year enrolled in these legal clinics, over 500 clients every year, a lot of cases that go to court, but also cases in which we create legislative bills, policy reports. So we use a wide range of legal strategies to promote human rights and to promote the interests of our clients. So it's really like a big law firm here at the faculty. It's buzzing with activity, lots of students going in and out, with tons of ideas. So, and sometimes, very creative ideas, sometimes crazy ideas about how to promote human rights, how to solve the legal problem that our clients present. And that is just an amazing experience. And we have so many important successes and also some failures that we'll talk about, but I think that maybe this is the point for questions and also for the small video, because I think that the video kind of gives you a feel about what we do.
So thank you. So since we are a small group and Jesse just wrote in a question, do you want to answer that and then we'll share the screen?
Great, Jesse. Yeah, thank you. So the legal profession, because it has exclusivity of representation is only by lawyers, right? So the legal profession has this exclusive right to practice the law. That creates an ethical duty to make law and make legal services accessible. And in each society, there are different ways in which the legal profession makes legal services accessible. In Israel, there are in the criminal area, there is counsel. People who can't afford a lawyer are given state-funded legal counsel. In several areas in civil law as well. So, for example, in family law, you can get a lawyer if you can't afford it. But there are tests, there are financial tests that you have, criteria that you have to fall under, and so that you can get this lawyer. We don't have these kind of rules, and the legal clinics and NGOs and legal organizations, and also pro bono that the Bar Association creates, all voluntary, but they also kind of fill the gap in terms of access to legal services. There is still an overwhelming need for legal services, and there are several NGOs in Israel that used to provide this kind of legal services that have closed down in recent years. So the feeling in the organizations such as legal clinics that give services to people who can't afford lawyers is that the need is absolutely enormous, and that we are only able to provide. Just today somebody asked, if we can help them with a bankruptcy, to file for bankruptcy. We had to say no. We just can't supply the demand.
Okay. Thanks for that question, Jesse. Tommy, so let's go on to the video, and then I'm sure it'll raise many more questions.
Right.
Okay, is this where I share screen?
Yes.
Okay. I think I need to bring it to the beginning. Yeah. Can everybody see this still?
We can see.
Okay. Yeah.
או שחור או לבן, זה הכל בן האדם. כולנו מאלוהים אחד, כולנו יש לנו דם, אותו דם. יש לי 3 ילדים, כולם נולדו פה בפתח תקווה. שהלכתי לרשם את ילדים שלי, התקשרו אליי, אמרו לי, הילד לא יכול ללמוד בגן עירייה. הכל שמשהו עושים, הילדים שלנו שלא ילמדו, שיהיה לנו חיים קשה פה בפתח תקווה, שנצא מפה. ילדה שלי יום אחד אמרה לי, הראש העיר לא אוהב אותנו. אז ממש כאילו נבלתי, אמרתי לה, למה את אומרת ככה? לא, בגלל אנחנו שחורים. באותו זמן, כאילו, שלא היה לנו תשובה, כאילו, לילדים שלנו, אם לא ילכו לגן עירייה, ניתקו להרבה בתים חשמל ומים. זה גם היה מאוד מאוד קשה. הרגשנו שאנחנו לא בן אדם.
עיריית פתח תקווה פעלה בכל מיני דרכים כדי למרר את חייהם של התושבים האריתראים פה, בניתוקי חשמל, בעקיפה בררנית בעניין פיצול דירות ודברים אחרים, בהפרת הזכות לחינוך. הם עברו סבל מאוד גדול כדי להגיע לחינוך. רובם לא התחילו את שנת הלימודים במועד, היינו צריכים לעבור את התהליך הזה שהוא מיותר. לאחר מאבק בית המשפט הבין את הסיפור, הבין שמפרים את החוק ביודעין. הוא הורה לעירייה ומשרד החינוך לרשום את הילדים.
בזכות הרן והצוות שלו הגענו לבית משפט. שם באמת בית משפט ראיתי שהרגשתי שאני כמו בן אדם, משהו שאנחנו שומעים לנו, החזירו לנו את החיוך של הפנים.
פה היסטוריה משפחתית מאוד ארוכה. פה אנחנו גרנו בבית בשנות ה-70, זה היה לסבתא שלי, סבתא שלי נתנה אותו לאבא שלי. גם אני גדלתי פה, גם הילדים שלי נולדו בבית הזה. בעזרת השם אנחנו נמשיך ונתגורר בבית הזה. אני בשנת 99 נאשמתי בתיק רצח. הגעתי לפה להשתקם, לא הסתדרתי. פתחתי את המקום תחנת סמים גדולה. השתחררתי עוד פעם קיימתי מקום של סחר בסמים. השפטתי 6 חודשים על סמוי. סמר לאריה, משיקום האסיר. איך תתחתן, תעשה משהו בחיים טובים, תקדם עם החיים. מצא לי עבודה טובה. הבית הזה, השיפוץ שלו זה חלק מהשיקום שלי. התחלתי להשתקם, ללכת בדרך ישרה. שמע, עזבתי את כל הדאווינים. לפני השיפוץ היה הבית מאוד גרוע. לחיות פה היה אי אפשר לבני אדם לחיות פה. אין כלום. איך אני מפרט לך? שאתה צריך להיכנס לחדר ולתפוס מטריה שלא ירד עליך גשם. אני התחתנתי בזמן הזה, ורוב שהייתה מחיה קשה פה, אז היא הלכה והתגוררה אצל אמא שלה, עם הילדים. עמידר כאן היו מבקרים כל כמעט חודש. היו מסתכלים על השיפוץ, איך נהיה הבית. אז הם לא אמרו לי שהבית, שאתה צריך לפנות אותו. אחרי תקופה רצו להוציא אותנו מהבית ולהעיף אותנו. איך אחרי תקופה כזאת באים רוצים למכור את הבית שלי? כמו שלוקחים ממך את הנשמה, עוקרים לך אותה לאט לאט, כמו שאתה מתמוטט. אין לך לאן ללכת. פנינו לג'ומאנה וסמר, והתחילו לעזור כמו אנשים טובים וזה. נתנו לנו תקווה מאוד חזקה, שאנחנו נשאר בבית, שלא יפנו אותנו.
מאוד נקשרתי למשפחה הזאת, כי אני מאוד מעריכה אנשים שלוקחים אחריות על החיים שלהם. וזו דוגמה למופת של באמת, של אנשים שלמרות הנסיבות המאוד קשות, כן? ואני לא יכולה לתאר לעצמי לגדול בסביבה כזאת, ולהוציא את עצמי ממעגל הורס הרסני, ולהפוך לבן אדם שגם עובד וגם לומד וגם יש לו משפחה. זה באמת נתון להערצה, כי זה בסופו של דבר גם המטרה של העבודה שלנו בקליניקה. אנחנו חותרים לשינוי חברתי באמצעות המשפט. אז אם זה לא דוגמה, אם המשפחה הזו היא לא דוגמה לשינוי חברתי, אז מה כן?
אם אני משווה את החיים לפני הסדנה ואחרי הסדנה, אני חייבת להגיד באמת שהחיים אחרי הסדנה הם הרבה יותר קלים והרבה פחות מורכבים. היינו בתקופה מאוד קשה בדירה של המון סכסוכים והמון פיצוצים וריבים. אם זה היה על התורנויות או זה סתם היה על אנחנו יוצאים בשישי בערב ולמה אתה לא יוצא איתנו.
הפרויקט הזה התחיל כאשר שובל, שהיא סטודנטית בוגרת מהקליניקה של שנה שעברה, ניגשה אליי במהלך השנה ואמרה, תשמעי, אמא שלי מנהלת מערך דיור לאנשים עם צרכים מיוחדים.
בתחילת הפעילות של הקליניקה עברנו כל הסטודנטים קורס גישור, ולאורך הקורס, גם לאחריו וגם לאורך הקורס עצמו, אני הרגשתי שהוא מאוד משמעותי בשבילי, ושלמה לא להפיץ את הכלים האלה גם הלאה. האנשים האלה גרים בעצם בדירות משותפות, למשל בדירה הזו גרים 6 דיירים, חלקם זוגות נשואים, חלקם דיירים בודדים, ויש המון קונפליקטים. אני חושבת שזה יהיה כל כך נכון לבוא ולתת להם כלים איך לנהל את הקונפליקטים שלהם טוב יותר.
קיבלנו טיפים, למשל, איך ללמוד להקשיב בצורה יותר טובה, לדעת גם איך לתת ביקורת אחד כלפי השני בלי לפגוע. נגיד, כשמישהו מדבר איתי, לתת לו הכי הרבה תשומת לב, שבאמת אכפת לנו איך הוא מרגיש ומה הוא רוצה להגיד, ומה פוגע בו ומה קשה לו. התחתנו לא מזמן, אחרי בעצם שאנחנו היינו זוג במשך 4.5 שנים, וכן, הסדנה עזרה בתקופת הגיבוש לחתונה וההכנות, שהכל היה הרבה יותר רגוע והכל תוך כדי דו-שיח ביני לבין בעלי היום. בעצם מאוד באנו מוכוונים שידענו, אוקיי, הולך להיות הרבה מתח והרבה בלגן והרבה רעש,
פשוט מה שעשינו זה לבנות כאילו תוכנית עבודה של איך אנחנו לוקחים את הכלים וגורמים לזה שהתקופה הזאת תעבור בצורה הרבה יותר רגועה. החיים היום בבית הרבה יותר סבלניים, הרבה יותר מכילים, הרבה יותר שקטים, הרבה פחות מתח, הרבה פחות רעש בין אחד לשני. הסדנה בהחלט גיבשה את הבית, ואני מאמינה שהיא עוד תמשיך לגבש.
יורית.
Thank you.
Can I just, I want to say just a word about the video, and these are just kind of 3 stories, but what I like about the 3 different stories is that they really show the various different tools. So when we think about legal clinics or about, you know, ACLU kind of type, we usually think about these battles in court, but our view of how to use the law to create positive social change is much wider than just going to court. So teaching people with disabilities tools of negotiation or dispute resolution and empowering them to be able to solve their own small, everyday, mundane conflicts is to us part of social change, part of using legal tools to create this kind of social change. So we really try to give students kind of the whole as rich experience as we can. When Karen and I can talk about the problem, just a second.
Tommy, we lost you.
While Tommy's coming back, Karen or Barry or anyone else, does anyone know if there are clinics like this in other universities, in law faculties in other universities in Israel, or is it just in Haifa?
I personally don't know. There may be, and we can ask that directly of Tommy.
Tommy, are you
Out
still
here.
with us? We just can't see her. She's okay.
She wrote, just a second, sorry.
Oh, okay.
So I was asking the same question as Ori was in the chat at the same time. So look forward to hearing how influential this might be.
Are you okay?
Yes, I'm so enthusiastic that I kicked my computer and my camera went off. So just a second.
There was like an earthquake in Israel, a little mini one.
Possible, but no. Okay, just a second. Let's see.
Well, I hope folks from Adat Shalom can understand from this so far short overview of the clinic and Tommy herself why I thought this might be a good program for our synagogue. We are, Tommy, a synagogue where I would say that the vast majority of members are strong supporters of Israel. There are some not so much. However, even among those strong supporters, I think it's fair to say, not like in our parents' generation, where they may have said Israel, right or wrong. You know, we see the challenges that the citizens of Israel encounter every day, whether they be structural, inadvertent, in any event. This is why a clinic such as yours drew me. It drew me right in to learn more about it. So we have a couple of questions. The first in the list was how influential are your programs nationally, and have other law schools followed suit?
Well, legal clinics, so first to the last question, it's easier. So legal clinics are an American invention. They've been in US law schools for the past, I think, 50 years, maybe in some places even more. In Israel, they've been operating for about 20 years, and every single law school in Israel has a clinical program. There are also legal clinics in Europe, although slightly less developed. In England, there are legal clinics in many universities and also in other places in Europe. So the legal clinics are a very large movement. It's an amazing community of practitioners. Nothing unique, of course. Haifa's the best, but nothing in that sense unique to Haifa. I think that's your first comment about, you know, Israel having really kind of special, or I don't know if unique, but very serious challenges. And I think that, you know, especially in terms, if we think about the rights of Arab and discrimination of Arab Israelis, or now, you know, the discussions about Ukrainian refugees, should Israel absorb refugees that are not Jewish and do not have a right to enter Israel through the law of return, and all kinds of challenges. And I think that as clinicians and as human rights lawyers more generally, we find ourselves always on the side of criticism. And we're often blamed, you know, kind of accused as not being Zionistic enough, and not being, you know, not loving Israel, and not supporting Israel, and automatically taking, you know, the side of Israel's enemies, or at least critics. And that's true. I mean, we are the critical side of the profession, but I think that comes from a very deep, you know, I always say that you don't feel at home unless you get upset from the news, right? So if you visit, sometimes you can be curious and listen to the news, but it's kind of far away. You don't get really annoyed. When I hear the news in Israel, you know, I get very emotional. It upsets me. It annoys me. I get angry because I expect of Israeli society to be a just society, and to be, you know, to be a migdalot, to be all agreeing in a sense. And so I think that for Israel, there's always the possibility to find excuses, right? We have so many challenges, we have so many problems, but those are just excuses. And I think we have a lot of challenges in terms of human rights, and I think that's perhaps even more interesting to the wide audience than just, you know, just the clinics. We try to do what we can, of course, but yeah.
So other law clinics, do they, in Israel, do they also take an approach to social justice, or is it mainly, you know, these are the civil cases and these are the criminal cases? And I mean, how do you compare to other clinics?
Right. So I think that one of the things that perhaps, and I wouldn't say that this is unique to Haifa, but one of the things that we believe in here at the Haifa University clinics is really an approach, as you said, to social justice. For example, our education law clinic. So you saw in the short video, you saw a case, and this is actually a whole set of cases, because we do about 3 or 4 cases every year about education for asylum seekers. We're in the midst of a very large litigation against Tel Aviv-Yafo at the moment. Tel Aviv-Yafo is actually a town which treats its asylum seekers quite well. They enroll all the kids to kindergarten and to schools, but they enroll them into separate kindergartens and schools. So we're in the middle of litigating that at the moment, right? Segregation case, basically. So But in addition to that kind of basic rights, and I want to kind of make a distinction between a human rights approach, which is like the right to education, anti-discrimination, these kind of things that I think are more typical, perhaps also in US clinics. We also take a stand in areas of social justice. And in education, I think it's easier to give an example for that. So one of the biggest cases, and also the biggest cases in which we didn't succeed, in which we failed, one of our most painful failures, was in the area of free education. So in Israel, public schools are allowed to charge fees from parents. And I hope this sounds strange to you guys. My children studied in the United States when I was a postdoc there, and we never paid, a penny for anything, including supplies, and it was all free. In Israel, schools, public schools, by law, are allowed to charge fees from parents. Recently, in 2014, Ministry of Education issued a new regulation that allows certain kinds of schools, public schools, again, nothing, these aren't private schools, these are completely public schools, to charge even larger amounts of money. And not only for things like, excursions or day trips or things like that, but just for studying. Okay, so for creating, for giving another major for senior students for their SATs, for taking students who major in say in geography, taking them to see, to day trips to see the places that they study about, charging fees. And parents who aren't able to pay, their children don't participate in the activities. So, and this was this is parents, I think, in Israel have become used to the fact that this is how things are. Saying things like, well, there isn't enough money and we want our children to have more. So that's how things, that's just how things are. And if we don't allow parent payments, then schools will just give, shorter days. Students will go home at 12:30 in noon. So everybody's happy. Schools are happy because they have more funds. Parents are happy because their children have what they think is a better education. And some of the children just don't participate in that, and they have a weaker education or a thinner education than other children. And this was a case we took to the Supreme Court. We thought that it was a very strong legal case, not just morally right, but also a strong legal case, because there's a law in Israel that states that education should be free, that public education should be free, and that every child in Israel has a right to free public education. But after a very long litigation of 5 years, we got a decision from the Supreme Court saying that, while we understand that, we have concerns for equality, and, too bad that things can't be ideal the way the petitioners would like them to be, and we kind of, we understand them, they're very nice, but we prefer that parents who want to pay will be able to pay for their children's education. And we thought that that was a very problematic decision by the Supreme Court. I remind you that there is a sphere of private education in Israel, right? So people who perhaps would like to get a different education than what the state provides do have that option. But public education, we feel, should be free and should be equal. And that decision was actually quite heartbreaking for some of us that were kind of, invested in that and really thought that that was both, a right decision in terms of, the moral stance that justice requires, but also a very strong legal case in which the judges just couldn't, they couldn't grasp the case. They said things like, some parents choose to invest their money in buying a new sofa, and this is the words, that are in the decision, and some parents want to invest their money in the education of their children.
Question.
Yeah.
Is that issue equally prevalent in Haredi, Arab citizen, and Jewish citizen schools? Is it equally prevalent, or is it more prevalent in one of those constituencies?
So for Arab and Haredi students, I think the problem is probably even worse. This is a problem of the dominant, Jewish Jewish family in Israel, right? Do I have enough money to send my children to good schools, or to schools in which we have a rich enough educational program? Haredi schools don't have, or almost don't have, a public school option for all kinds of reasons, right? So the Haredi are a group that chose, or at least their leaders choose them to be separate from the state education. So there are almost no Haredi state schools, or for many years there were no Haredi state schools, and a very small political moment in which Shai Piron was the Minister of Education. I don't know how deep you are familiar with Israeli politics, but there was a short government in 2013 in which the Haredi were not part of the government. And Shai Piron, a rabbi, a non-Haredi, just an Orthodox rabbi, was the Minister of Education, and opened state Haredi education, with a thought that instead of fighting, and there was a lot of fighting in courts and political fighting about getting the Haredi families to allow their children to learn core studies, right? To learn anything but Jewish studies, to study mathematics and science and English and civic studies, in which their schools are not required to teach any of that. So instead of fighting about what private Haredi schools have to teach, Shai Piron decided to open another option for Haredi parents who do want their children to be able to integrate into society and integrate into to the marketplace, into employment, into Israeli employment, and opened a small group of schools, state Haredi schools, in which Haredi families would be able to educate their children according to their way of life, Haredi way of life, but also get full state funding for their schools and be required to teach the core curriculum. Since Shai Piron was only Minister of Education, I think, for a year and a half, maybe a bit more, and since the Haredi parties were back into government, and so that option all but died, we had a group of clients in our clinic, Haredi parents, who had a private school like all Haredi schools, but who wanted their school to turn into a state school. They wanted to get this funding. They also wanted their children to learn secular studies. These are mostly Chozrim B'Tshuva, or some American Haredi people who come to Israel, and because Israeli Haredi people who are born Haredi usually don't have that kind of desire for their children to study the core curriculum. And interestingly enough, the Minister of Education and the local authority refused to open a state Haredi school for these families. Right? So that is absolutely absurd, because the interest of the state is that these children study the core curriculum and integrate into Israeli society. We have so many problems because these children are incapable of then going into higher education, right? So the problem for Haredi children, and they didn't agree to open the school. We went to court and an appeal to the Supreme Court, and both failed. And the reason for that is completely political. So the local authority didn't want to open a state Haredi school. This is Mevaseret, I don't know if you know, a small town next to Jerusalem, very kind of upper, middle class, mostly secular. Didn't want to open a Haredi school because, once you open a Haredi school, Haredi people will come and live there. So they didn't. Yeah. And the state didn't, the Ministry of Education didn't want to open a state school because the Haredi politicians have, they have to pay their dues to the private schools networks. So problems are different for Haredi children.
Your expertise, I know, is in education.
That's right. Yes.
There are a number of questions that veer away from education. So
Definitely.
if you don't mind, we'll go in that general direction.
Yeah.
One has to do with the range of problems that the clinics covers. Battered women, aguna. Are there issues like that that come to the clinic?
Yes, definitely. So one of our clinics, we have a clinic that does women's rights specifically. It's a very special clinic. You know, there are lots of women's organizations in Israel, I think, worldwide. So really, we try to carve out something that is unique for the clinic and that is different from other organizations, and the kind of the way or the unique kind of services that we give is related to the fact that we don't give just legal services. Okay, we give a very kind of holistic socio-legal services. I'll give you an example. So women who are survivors of sexual assault or sex crimes in general meet different units in the government or different service givers, right? So they go to the police, and then they go to the social security to get a pension, and they meet doctors in the ER when they go to the ER to get treated. And in all of these different places and all of the different hurdles that they have to go through, there are a lot of problems in these areas. So for example, there are something called an acute room, which is the room in the ER, a special room in the ER, which treats people who have been victims for sex crimes, and they treat them just medically, but also they collect forensic evidence. And we discovered, together with some of our partners, that the regulations, the Ministry of Health has regulations regarding these acute rooms, and they destroyed the rape kits after 3 months. Now, as you know, forensic evidence, when it's under the Department of Justice, right? So they keep it for years. But this was under the Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Health has different regulations regarding, things that they take from examinations, and they destroyed rape kits after 3 months. Of course, this prevented many cases of pursuing justice for rape and sexual assault victims. So this is one project that the students wrote a policy paper, did some comparative research, checked how things work in other places in the world, and created a policy paper, presented it to the Ministry of Health, and students. This is second-year students standing in front of professionals in the Ministry of Health and changing things for hundreds of victims later on. This was 5 years ago. And we now, and this was, a huge success, and we're very proud, blah, 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 blah. Unfortunately, this hasn't happened yet. And we just filed a petition to the Supreme Court saying, you have stated time and again that you would change the regulations, but these regulations haven't been enacted yet. So we've seen drafts, and they've gone back and forth to different people, in charge of checking, but this hasn't happened yet. So you can see that the fight for human rights in all the different areas is so difficult. It's such a long way, and students come to this petition from 5 years ago. We have mailing lists for different projects with different students, and they come, they've been lawyers for a long time, but they still come to see, what's happening with the project that they were trying to promote. So unfortunately, this is a case in which first of all, it seems almost, nonsensical to destroy rape kits after 3 months. It doesn't make sense. And everybody agreed that this had to be changed. And still, we need to go and fight this, this war. So that's regarding women's rights. We had a crazy increase in cases of domestic violence in COVID. And this is a worldwide phenomenon. I know that the United States also saw an increase in these cases, up to the point that there weren't any places, there weren't any shelters available for our clients. So we had, a weekend that we had over 20 cases coming in with women who needed help and just didn't know where to begin even. And so we do the legal stuff. We file for protection orders and for warrants and for anything needed, but we also kind of do all the background stuff, including even just collecting stuff for the kids and clothes and anything you need, and finding placement in shelters. So definitely also in that area we have a lot of what we do. And yeah,
I'm sorry. Are you at all involved in disputes among settlers and Palestinians in the occupied territories?
All right. So I think that, and I'm glad you asked that question, because sometimes when we try to think or give a picture about human rights in Israel, so we think about things like discrimination in the workplace and maybe LGBTQ rights, which is another thing that we do a lot in our clinics, and even asylum seekers and undocumented individuals and things like that. But there is kind of one thing looming, right, somewhere in the background, and that is the occupation, and the fact that Israel, is occupying an area in which people do not have citizenship, and they do not have rights to determine their fate and to be involved and in decision making, and a long list of human rights that they don't have. And this is somewhere where we're in a dilemma in the legal clinics. And I think that this is a problem for legal clinics in the US as well. And I'll say this carefully because, we're recorded and everything. But the legal clinics have come under attack by, political movements, inside universities, student-led political movements inside universities, but also from the government. I think maybe the culmination, kind of one of the points that I might state in this fact was an ethical an ethical code that was that when Naftali Bennett, who is currently Prime Minister, when he was Minister of Education, he tried to enact an ethical code for universities, in which it was something like 12 sections, and one of these sections was directed specifically to the legal clinics, and said something like, legal clinics shouldn't do anything political. The problem is that, everything's political. Human rights are political. If you try to promote equality, gender equality, equality between Jews and Arabs, name one issue that isn't political. And that was kind of troubling. I think that we kind of try to find, especially in these areas which are very much contested, try to find the cases in which the law is very clear on, right? So I'll give you an example. We have a project. That Palestinians in the West Bank are not under the same legal order as Israeli citizens, right? So their criminal courts and their court system is a martial court system. It's a military court system. And we have one of these courts just under the Carmel in Megiddo. A 30-minute drive from the University of Haifa. It's it's really on the border. It's very close to Jenin. So this court is really like a 200-meter walk to the fence, and criminal procedure for Palestinians take place in that court. So our human rights clinic had a project in which we went to the court. The court is open generally. It's not everyone can come in, but if you request in advance, then usually they allow you to sit in the proceedings, just to sit in the proceedings and to examine, to kind of monitor, to check that the Palestinians being in the different proceedings, that their procedural rights are being maintained, right? So we can't go to the bottom of the problem of the occupation. We can't, argue that it goes against human rights, or it's unfair, or it's unjust that people don't have citizenship, or that people are held under occupation, or that their right to movement, their right to family, these different rights are being infringed upon. But we can do things that are related to, are they being allowed to meet their lawyer? And for example, we found that there isn't a room in which people can meet their lawyer. They had to meet their lawyer inside the courthouse, right, where the prosecutor and the judge and other people are kind of sitting there and can listen on. So that kind of the small things. And I say this, sadly, because we have, we're very grandiose people. We want to save the world. We want to make big changes. But I think that at least in my experience, the public isn't really, that's not where Israeli public is at the moment. So we have to be kind of more careful in the things that we choose to do. And there is also a price for failing. So we have to choose our battles very wisely.
We'll get back to issues in a second, but I'm not sure. Mim, you worked for the Department of Education?
Never.
No.
No, I work for the
Okay.
Department of Justice, but that's an interesting point. I put in the chat the fact that when I'm the old lady here, I got out of law school in 1969 and I didn't even start right after college, okay? And I went to NYU, which was a different incarnation entirely. The people of my generation totally changed NYU to be what it is today. And now they're retiring. But I came to work for the United States Department of Justice, the way you say I went to my safe school. That was the job I got. Everybody wanted to work for the clinics that were all over the country, sponsored by the Office of Economic Opportunity. And they had these wonderful backup centers that did the law reform. And of course, exactly what you were saying, everything was being characterized as political because, for example, these are the people who invented welfare rights, the notion that there was such a thing as welfare rights, because welfare had statutes and you could force the government to follow its own statutes as far as who was entitled to what. Of course, then Congress changed what people were entitled to and also pretty much stopped funding these clinics, which I'm sure you're gonna, that's why I asked, where are the jobs? What do people do when I didn't get a job because I would only go to one of the law reform centers. I didn't want to go do landlord tenant the rest of my life. And so I had to do this terrible thing and work for the United States Department of Justice when Nixon had just become president. I mean, it was a very embarrassing situation. But that's why I'm asking, what do you do about sustaining this after people get out of law school?
Thanks, Mim.
There aren't many jobs in human rights or legal clinics, and the jobs that that they do have are underpaid. Our clinicians are leading lawyers in their area. They all have LLMs. Some of them are PhD. We have a PhD clinician, and every opening, there are tons of people who want to work as clinicians. I think because it really is an amazing, it's teaching and it's activism and it's being a lawyer and it's being a researcher. I mean, it's everything. It's an amazing job, but it doesn't pay very well, and there are not very many jobs. Most of the students, and I think that's, and I also think that's okay. In Israel, there are, I think it's the #1 in law students in the world, like per citizen. A lot of people go to law school without wanting to be lawyers afterwards. So they, go into business or go into government in various facilities, but not as lawyers. But I think the human rights community is really in a point of in a crossroads, because the only people that can afford to be human rights lawyers are privileged people who can afford to kind of have a hobby and be a human rights lawyer. Actually, the legal clinics, we had a kind of workers' strike a few years ago here. We were very happy about that, telling our clinicians, oy vavoy, you're going on a strike, but actually being very happy about it. and the conditions, the working conditions have improved slightly. But still, of course, nothing like being a private lawyer, nothing like even working for the government. It's very underpaid and there are not many jobs. And also, I might say, in terms of kind of the hierarchy inside academia, they're not the legal theorists, but they are the coolest people in the building, always. So it's the most fun is at the law clinics, but it's a problem. But some students, and I see this, not always the best students, the strongest academically, but some students really find their, they find their mission in the clinics. You just see how.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
I'm gonna ask Rabbi Fred to articulate his question. Fred is known both locally and certainly all over the U.S. as an environmentalist, and we're very proud of him for that. So, Fred, why don't you direct your question?
Thank you. It could have come from you or Laura or Ethan or Barry, I mean, many of us. So first of all, Hamon Toda, this is incredible. And a second question might be how we in the Gola can support these efforts, always appropriate, of our favorite Israeli amutot. And specifically because so many of us work around environmental justice, and we know that Mifratz Haifa and the metropolitan area is a particular hotspot of environmental injustice, with fence-line communities facing massive disproportionate pollution, and low-income communities in particular. So you've already described an incredible range of good work, and curious on top of all of that, how large environmental law looms both for the clinic and for the program as a whole.
So we have, thank you for that question. We have generally Haifa University, because of our location on the beach, have a very strong relationship, and we have an amazing program for the study of the sea, also for maritime archaeology. And
Tommy, 1 second. Can you explain how it is that Haifa University has the location on the beach? Because before we were talking about the main campus on the hill.
Upload a picture. The hill is just above the ocean. It's very beautiful. I think, and unique, that the mountain really kind of goes straight down into the it's not an ocean, it's the Mediterranean, but into the Haifa Mifratz, the Gulf, and so we're really surrounded by the sea from all sides. And we have a program, we have several programs, and the leading programs in Israel for study of the sea, including, as I said, archaeology and but also biology, marine biology, and things like that. We had
actually. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. The question, maybe I didn't ask it correctly. I understand that Haifa University has an expansion strategy, which is very important to the university in terms of building a campus or various buildings near the sea, well, at the bottom of the mountain. So that's actually what I was asking.
So we have
Sorry.
A few, as I said, we have the kind of the fact that we're on the mountain is not, I mean, we love it, but we're not completely, satisfied with our ability to be within the community. So we have two new points. One is in the downtown, which is very much near the sea, and several units are already there, and several units are moving there. We actually really wanted to be one of those units, but they didn't want us, so we're remaining on the mountain. And the other one is in a center for the study of the ocean, which is really on the beach, a bit to the south of Haifa. What I wanted to say about the legal clinics and environmental law in general is that we had environmental clinic that focused on the sea and on issues that are related to the sea, and this was in partnership with the program for ocean studies. This has been on, we call this sabbatical or break for the past 2 years because the clinician is focusing on her PhD at the moment. But this is definitely one of the things. We have 2 experts who do environmental law at the law faculty. So we are definitely, this is one of the things that we're very much interested in doing. We have another program that I think that is, I mean, we see it as environmental justice, although it's not. It's more about planning and equality in planning and distributed justice in planning. And that is a program in Haifa with the poor, the disadvantaged neighborhoods in downtown Haifa. And these are 2 Arab neighborhoods, Wadi Misnas and the other one is Khalisa, which are 2 Arab neighborhoods which have been going through gentrification. One of the people that you saw in the video is from Wadi Misnas. A lot of cases there. It's very much near the port, and there's been a lot of rebuilding, and it's a very beautiful kind of you know, cool. Lots of bars and kind of nightlife and things like that. But the problem is that, of course, in these processes, the town becomes more attractive perhaps to tourists and to middle class or students. But the problem is that the people who live there or who have lived there for many years get kind of pushed out of these places. So we had a 6-year project in these neighborhoods in which we created a local activist group, trained them regarding their participation rights in planning, created different working units to discuss, you know, the different things that are important to them. They had problems with transportation, with public transportation, with the roads, with different infrastructures. So we did a lot of work about planning rights and about creating tools, creating community tools for participation in planning processes in the city. So these are the kind of 2, the sea and planning.
Did you have another question, Fred? Okay, how about if we open it now? I hope that I've covered the questions that were in the chat, but in case you feel as if your question wasn't asked properly or answered correctly, let's jump in. Gordon.
Yeah. So I like to ask questions. So I'm going to give you 3 questions and you can answer 1 if you want to be efficient on time. So, you know, one question is, I mean, it's been widely accepted in the US for years that the 2nd and 3rd years of law school are basically useless. And a lot of schools here have developed extensive clinical programs. I mean, I know that Stanford and NYU have extensive programs. Howard University, University of Tennessee have built their reputation on some of these. Is there a sort of a burgeoning clinics movement generally in Israeli law schools?
Okay, that's one.
Okay. The second is, and this is just, you know, I do sort of technology risks for part of the World Bank group. And I'm just curious if things like ethics and privacy and non-compete agreements and other sort of symptoms of the modern technology society have come to your clinic. And the third I was just interested in was what the diversity of your own clinic, the students, is, whether you've been as successful in attracting a diverse group of law students. Thank you.
Thank you. So is the clinical community as strong? I mean, do the law schools really understand the benefit and the importance of clinical or experiential education? Not enough, not nearly enough. And you know what? Even in the U.S., and there's a clinical survey once every 2 or 3 years that hundreds of clinicians from different law schools answer questions. What their challenges are. How many clinics there are. Different things about their conditions of employment, things like that. And still, clinicians say that one of the challenges or one of the problems that they face is the hierarchy within law schools. Something about Hume famously said that there's a hierarchy in knowledge where the theoretical knowledge is regarded as the highest form of knowledge, and the practical knowledge is kind of and I think that law schools, especially in Israel, are still very much, clinics are nice to have, the students enjoy them, they're fun, sometimes they have cool stuff, but the important thing is learning legal theory. And I teach philosophy, right? I love theory, but I still think that there is so much theory to be gained from practicing, right? So that's the interesting thing. Going to court and then coming back to the classroom and talking about, what went on there, what was going on, why did things work like that? Where is all the beautiful theories that we're talking about? Where's the doctrine? And in the end, you go into court and it's like a market, right? So law schools in Israel still are really far away from understanding that, I feel. And that is one of the things that I see as my role as the academic director, right? My one leg is here and one leg is there, and that is one thing that I think is really important. Technological risks, definitely. We have an amazing clinic that does cyber law. For example, we just received a grant from the EU that is giving us money to map all the governmental use of algorithms in decision making, right? So, for example, you can get a tax audit saying that you should pay X, Y, Z, and then you can ask, but how did you reach this number? Why do I have to pay so much taxes? And they'll say something like, we don't know. This was, the algorithm. The algorithm said, and that's what you have to pay. And this is a case that we represented in the Supreme Court, saying that no such thing. They have to disclose what the algorithm said and what are the criteria to receive this tax audit. And one of the most basic problems is that we don't know which decisions are being made based on algorithms in Israel's government, different governmental agencies today. So that is one project, but also lots of stuff about autonomous vehicles and about drones and commercial use of drones and privacy in online, and a lot of stuff. And students that go to that kind of clinic are students, and that's fine. I'm totally fine with that. Students who don't want to do, some of the poverty law and the kind of heart-wrenching cases, and they want to go, and they'll be amazing lawyers for law firms or for high-tech firms, and that's really great. But also kind of to see the wider social picture. So definitely one of the things that we do. The last question also, I'm very grateful, and Gordon and I kind of talked before, and I asked him to ask this question, just kidding, but about the diversity. I found that students from disadvantaged backgrounds, and I mean minority students, Arab Israeli students, but also students from less privileged backgrounds, they come to law school and they want to, they're strivers, right? They want to get ahead. They want to go to the best law firms. They want to, and sometimes they choose not to go to the legal clinic. You would think that, if we have a legal clinic that is focused on Arab rights, then we would have a lot of, a bunch of Arab students just pouring over to the clinic. And I found that it's more complicated than that. But we do have almost all the students go to the clinics at either second year or third year. So our whole diverse population come to the legal clinics. It's interesting to see how they divide. So, for example, we have the women's right clinic, and every year we have one or two guys who go there. And it's always kind of strange because that Hebrew is a gendered language. Ani medaberet, I speak in female, and the clinic speaks in female. And so these guys, kind of assume the gendered female form of talk. And it's very interesting. It's kind of to see who come to the clinic and why. But all the students come. We have about a quarter of our students are Arab, so we see that in the clinics as well. We also have Arab clinician. Clinicians are usually women. We have only one male clinician, so that's interesting also. But we really see a diverse group. And what I like about the clinics is that, as I said right at the beginning of my talk, students, Arab and Jewish students, study here at Haifa side by side. Often side by side, that is the closest that they'll ever get, right? And that's just how things are, right? People are more comfortable with their own. In the clinics, we really make it our point that students, Jewish and Arab students, will work together doing something else, like promoting a shared mission, a shared project. And that is where we see friendships and cooperation and the possibility to talk to each other, truthfully, to say the real things that they feel and to say the difficult things and to listen to the difficult things. And that, I think, is one of the most important things and meaningful things. And when we had the riots here in Haifa, and I had to go into a jurisprudence class, right? So I was supposed to talk about legal philosophy, which is, great, amazing, interesting. But I said, I can't do that. Let's talk about what's going on. And we had a very painful discussion in class. And people told me, you're crazy. Why would you do it? It's so dangerous to allow students to talk like that, Jews and Arabs, and to say what they really feel about each other and about the situation and about their feeling of being threatened and safety and things like that. But that is what the clinics do. We allow that space. We create spaces in which people can bring themselves because they don't have to prove themselves. They've already proven that, we're on this together. We're doing this. We believe in the same things. We have a shared mission. And from that place, we can allow ourselves to disagree also sometimes. And I think that is one of the most amazing things when the year ends and the students say something like, I've been studying with these people for 2 years. We never said more than, hi, how are you? Or maybe shared like notes from a class, but nothing more meaningful than that. And the clinics, I think that, even if that's the only thing that we do, then we've done something good.
Unless someone else has a question, I have 2 more questions. Chaya.
Okay, shalom, and I guess this is more personal to me, but I'm just wondering, do you have any cases that have to do with gender rights and specifically like LGBTQ population, specifically trans?
Yeah. We have an amazing project this year that was funded by the EU for a 3-year project on health rights for trans people, and not just in terms of like the gender in Israel. To go under a gender reassignment surgery or any kind of treatment, you have to go through a committee, and that is the kind of thing we of course we give legal aid and representation when we need to people going through that. But it's even more than that, because trans people have a problem going to the doctor just for anything, right? So receiving, like in Israel, you have to go to the healthcare provider to get what's called hitchayvut, like a commitment from the healthcare provider that they're going to pay the hospital. So all these bureaucracy, every single step of the way, trans people meet transophobia, and they just kind of, they because they don't want to meet these kind of microaggressions, they stay at home, they don't do what they need to do, so they accrue debt. And then they have, so there are so many legal problems just arising from these kind of small meetings with all kinds of different service providers and healthcare providers. And so we have a 2.5-year project specifically on the different aspects of health for trans people. Which we are doing together with ACRI, which is the Israeli Association for Civil Rights, and with 2 grassroots organization of trans people. So, because one of the things that we don't really have access to is the field, right? So we often work in partnership with other organizations that have, you know, that can lead us to the cases and lead us to and teach us the problems, right? So that we can then kind of use the law as best we can to help.
In the interest of time, I'm going to take the right of ownership here and ask the last question. I believe you told me when we met that there have been instances where students in the clinics or law students in general, but I think it was in the clinics, would draft legislation and you know, either you won or you didn't win, but you actually went to the politicians with a draft of possible legislation. Can you explain that to us a little bit? I don't have any idea if that happens here. And if it does, it probably happens mainly on a state level, but in any event, I found that fascinating.
So one of the advantages of being a very small state is that we can access Supreme Court or even the Knesset for legislation, and we do that 5-10 times every single year. So, for example, we're working on legislation now. Israeli law has a strange lacuna in which oh, I forgot the word. In criminal law, having sexual relations in the family is illegal only if the victim is under the age of 21, right? So if the victim is over the age of 21, then we're under, like in terms of category, just general rape. You have to prove that it wasn't, that the victim didn't consent to having sex with the family member. And this is a project that one of our students raised. You can imagine why that student raised that project, and this is being now legislated. We have very good partnerships with various members of the Knesset. Recently, we had a nice success in cases of bankruptcy. In Israel, you have to file a fee, very high fee, to open the procedure to file for bankruptcy. And that, of course, is a barrier for people who are poor and can't pay what is required to open the procedure. So we suggested an amendment that the fee would be taken from the budget, from the bankruptcy budget, right? So once people file for bankruptcy, then you check, you know, all their belongings and how much money they have, and if you find money in that budget, then you can pay the fee. But it's not like a barrier before opening the procedure. So there are many different cases in which we create legislative bills, and we react on existing legislative bills. So this is definitely one of the ways in which we try to reform law in Israel.
Thank you. A number of people have asked, what, if anything, can we as individuals or even as a congregation do to support your program or the university? How might you direct us?
Right, so first of all, thank you so much. We have an association, an American Association of Friends. It's called ASU. I'll write it in the chat in a second. And anyone interested in the university in general, in our program is not funded by, although the university is funded by the state, the clinical program is not funded by the state. So all of our operations, and it's very lean. It's only the clinician salary and, you know, bits and pieces for their training and things like that. We don't have any like fancy operations or buildings or things like that. But all of it is on donations, grant money, foundations. That's my job. That's what I do. Try to find funding for the legal clinics. So of course, I'd be happy to, through ASU or me directly, be in touch with anybody. And if you're in Israel, definitely come and visit Haifa. and the legal clinics. We have centers in the city. We have a walk-in clinic for refugees and asylum seekers, which is amazing, and lots of different stuff. And I invite you to go to our website. We have our annual reports and our Facebook page. And so there are lots of places in which you can kind of check us up.
I would also like to add to that, that the university has a world-class archaeology museum. And it's open to the public, but it seems that very few people go there. So try. Thank you so much, Tommy.
Don't forget to put it in the chat. Put those connections in the chat, please.
Yes. Thank you very, very much for your time, for your insight. I hope everyone found this of interest. And I guess that's about it. Thank you so much.
Toda rabah.
Wonderful,
Wonderful.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.